Hi, Claire. Welcome to our symposium.
Good morning. Oh, good morning here.
It's good morning for you. Thanks again, because it's too early for you. I know that it's 6:30 a.m. in the morning in US. We really appreciate your contribution. Thanks a lot. Let me introduce your short biography, and then the screen will be yours.
Okay, while you do that, I'm going to try to get the presentation up, so you may see some things in the background.
Okay, all right. Okay, our next speaker is Dr. Claire Jacobson. She received her bachelor's and master's degree in English from Northwestern and Georgetown universities, and PhD in education, leadership, and policy from University of Maryland, College Park. Claire has spent her career working on student success at the intersection of students' academic and co-curricular learning. She previously held positions with the Council for the Accreditation of Educator Preparation, the University of Maryland, and Georgetown University. Claire has contributed to foundational research and is nationally recognized as a thought leader on high-impact practices, equity and assessment, and accelerating change through networks. Dr. Claire Jacobson is currently the Vice President of Campus Strategy at Student Opportunity, where she works with campuses to implement and scale experiential education that helps connect students' curricular experiences to their post-college goals. Previously, Claire served as the Director of National Association of System Heads, taking student success to scale high-impact practices network. In this role, she directed $1.2 million funded project to embed and scale promising high-impact practices at both the campus and system level, with a focus on closing equity gaps for first-generation students and students of color. She will talk about bridging the gap between curriculum and career, and we are looking forward to hear your talk. Screen is yours, Claire.
Me. So there's a slight sharing problem. I both sides and to see the audience or the chat. So I hope I'm pronouncing this correct, but Sajide is going to help me. If there's any questions, any clarification, if you need me to slow down, just know that I can't see you. So I'm going to try to pause every couple minutes or a bit, but I did want to flag that, also with the understanding that for the vast majority of you, I know you're listening to a presentation in a language that's not your primary language. So please feel free to call me out if you need any clarification or anything, but know that I can't see any of you while I'm presenting due to just some technical issues we're having.
Okay, I will follow the chat. Don't worry, Claire.
Okay, great. Yeah, and just don't worry about interrupting me, but know that I won't. I don't have any visual cues right now.
Okay. All right.
So as she said, I'm Claire Jacobson. I'm the Vice President of Campus Strategy at Student Opportunity Center. And we are an organization that works primarily with American colleges and universities to implement and scale high-quality experiential learning in order to help bridge the gap between classroom learning and post-college success. In my talk today, I'm going to first give some background about why this is a growing focus in the US, to discuss how experiential learning is increasingly a priority for American colleges and universities, and to briefly discuss 3 examples of how American institutions of higher ed are doing this work. Again, I just want to preface my remarks by saying that I'm speaking from an American perspective about American higher education, but I do believe that many, if not most, of the principles I will be discussing translate into non-American higher ed contexts, because ultimately what makes for effective teaching and learning works across the board with minor adjustments. And the focus for all of us in higher education is on providing quality educational experiences for students and preparing them for life after graduation. Just so a few notes on vocabulary. I am using curriculum to mean the courses that students take in their major and non-major, We talk a lot about the co-curriculum in the United States, and these are the activities and opportunities that students take outside the class, and this is a large part of most universities in the United States. You may see the acronym IHE throughout the PowerPoint. That's Institution of Higher Ed. I actually just said that a few minutes ago. Another acronym you see a lot is URM, for Underrepresented Minority Students. Or in the United States, that means students who are not from the majority white background. And then finally, the focus of this presentation is largely on experiential learning, or experiences students do, and this is both within and outside of courses that help connect their college education to their post-college career and life planning. Other terms you may see, if you're doing reading on this in the literature, or even through blogs or web postings, are learning by doing, applied learning, high impact practices, and high impact practices and experiential learning are the two terms that I typically use. But in general, these are all terms applying to the same thing. Traditionally, US higher education has created a divide between what students learn in the classroom and career preparation that happens outside the classroom. And this is especially true at the US's elite institutions. But increasingly, there is a push to bridge the gap between curriculum and career preparation and to help students, and by extension faculty, better articulate their education for employers. And there are several reasons for this shift. The first is that, you may know, the United States struggles with the graduation rates. The second is that there's a gap between the graduation rates for white and for non-white students, or for underrepresented minority students. And the third is that in the United States, there's diminishing confidence in higher education among the public at large. And so, in fact, due to this diminishing confidence in these other factors, since 2017, the US government has been debating a bill that would require colleges to release data on student enrollment, their persistence, transfer, and completion. And this would be for all programs and degree levels. And so this has, in fact, been in every Congress session since 2017, but it actually just passed last Friday, February 4th. And this bill, which is called the College Transparency Act, would require colleges to report this data, which then would be disaggregated by demographics, including race, ethnicity, gender, and age. And it would permit the Department of Education to share data with other US agencies, federal agencies, to calculate post-graduation outcomes, such as income and career prospects. So basically, this would be groundbreaking and completely new for the United States. We don't collect data like this on a federal level. There are a few states that do this, but right now you can't look at data and say, what does a biology major who attended this university do 5 years post-graduation? There's no way to do that at sort of a national level. So I just think that actually is really interesting. So that first reason I mentioned is graduation rates. The United States struggles with low graduation rates. In 2019, the overall 6-year graduation rate for first-time full-time undergraduate students who entered college seeking a bachelor's degree at a 4-year institution was 63%. But it's really important to call out that this was closer to 70% for white students and 52% for Black and Latino students. So there's a huge discrepancy by race. There's also a very large discrepancy in the United States by type of institution. So for example, in the state in which I currently live, which is Pennsylvania, I'm currently speaking to you from Philadelphia. There is an elite private institution, an Ivy League institution with close to 100% graduation rate. There's also a public institution with a 20% graduation rate. So you can also see there's a huge discrepancy in the type of institution for graduation rate. And then finally, there has been a huge shift in the last number of years between what we would define as a traditional student, someone who's 18 to 22, lives on campus, enrolled full-time, to what we call a non-traditional student, someone who's 25 plus, part-time, works full-time, has family obligations, and comes from less prepared backgrounds. And so all of these factors contribute to why students are less likely to graduate. But as you can see, most of those factors, how often, their age, their background, their working status, their family status, are not things within the college's ability to control. But one thing that is in the college's ability to control is what happens in the curriculum. And so that is one reason that there's been a huge shift to talking about experiential education. Finally, college in the US is increasingly a financial burden. The US has several forms of tuition. There's in-state tuition, and this is if you attend college in the state in which you are a resident, and it's the cheapest option. Out-of-state tuition if you attend college in another state, and then private colleges. But you can see that this is for 1 year of tuition. It ranges from just over $9,000 to $38,000. So college is a very expensive undertaking for students and for their families. Unfortunately, despite this increasing financial burden, there is increasingly a gap between students, between the skills. So employers routinely say that the skills on the left are the skills they're seeking in new employees, but they report a gap between the preparation of the students who are graduating and coming to them as new employees. Another interesting way of looking at this data is how students view their preparation and how employers are viewing their preparation. So there's a gap between students' perception of their preparation and employers' preparation of their preparation. And so either way we look at this information, there's a gap between the skills required for the workforce and the skills students are graduating with. And so part of this is a translation problem. Students may have the skills, but not know how to talk about them. And part of this is an exposure problem. Students may not actually have the skills. They may not have had the experience to develop the skills. But one way to focus on both of these problems, both this translation problem and this exposure problem, is through experiential learning, or by adding more opportunities to the curriculum that connect the classroom to career skills and that also help students articulate their learning. And again, this is something that's directly within the control of the university, unlike many of these other things that often feel out of a university's control, such as spiraling costs or the changing demographics or these other factors. However, in the United States, often career preparation is not something that's baked into the classroom. It's seen as something that another office does, or another class should take care of, or a specific person on campus should do. So increasingly, there's work to draw these connections in and to recognize that all learning should be career relevant learning. So I'm just going to pause for a second and see if I can perhaps see. I can't see you all. Are there any questions at this point? Sorry, it's very hard to present totally, totally blind.
We can see the screen, Claire.
Excuse me?
We can see the screen, there is no problem.
Okay, any questions or anything at this point?
Up to now, there are no questions. You can continue.
Okay. So one method by which to do this, to draw better connections between students' classroom preparation and the necessary skills required for the world of work, are through experiential learning or through high impact practices. And high impact practices, routinely called HIPs, are engaged teaching practices that research demonstrates benefit college students from all backgrounds, but they especially benefit students of color and first generation students. And so as you remember, those are the students who are graduating at particularly lower numbers and struggling in greater numbers. So that's particularly important. But to be effective, these practices must be implemented intentionally to ensure quality and to promote equitable participation of diverse students. And so this is the list of high impact practices that has been identified through the research. It doesn't mean that other practices can't have impact or other practices aren't experiential learning, but through the research done over the years, this is the list that's been developed. And I'm not going to go into that because it is a particularly, I think, American context, but just to say that there may be things that you're doing that aren't on this list. There may also be things on this list you are doing, but maybe have different language. So instead of service learning, maybe you call that community learning or something like that. But what's really important is the intentionality of the practices and the qualities that make something a HIP that I will be talking about in just a second. Other really important thing to note is that while high impact practices do differ, they have been widely embraced by countries as diverse as Australia, Canada, Malaysia, South Africa, and elsewhere. So while the research did come out of the United States in this survey called NSSE, or the National Survey of Student Engagement, that began about 10 years ago, they have grown beyond the US, and the research now does expand to these, this other set of countries that is continually growing. So why do HIPs matter? Why is this something that we focus on? Why is this an intervention that we think can help to solve these problems that I just laid out to you, these pretty significant problems? Well, first, research shows that participation in these practices helps to increase graduation and retention rates. So it actually is an intervention that helps to close the gaps we're trying to address. In fact, the more high impact practices a student completes, the more likely they are to earn a bachelor's degree within 6 years. So to hit that target we're looking for. And the effects for minority students is even greater. So again, hitting that population that we so need to hit to get to graduate. They also, and I don't want to underestimate how important this last bullet point is, but they re-energize faculty. Even before COVID, there were so many initiatives hitting faculty. There were so many things that they were being asked to do. And in my work, I found that often these initiatives were burdensome. That faculty wanted to do the right thing. They wanted their students to graduate, but it just felt like, every week or every month, there was a new initiative, a new committee to be on, something new to work on. And often it felt like there was no connection to their work in the classroom. Data is a huge drive right now. And it was often really hard to get faculty excited about many of these initiatives. What I find when talking about high impact practices is that faculty are excited and they see that immediate connection to their work in the classroom, and they want to participate in these committees. They want to know how can they get involved in these workshops to learn about high impact practices, and they're re-energized, they're excited. COVID has hurt that a little bit, but in fact, more than ever, we need things that re-energize our faculty because it has been such an incredibly difficult 2 years, and people need to feel that energy again. They need to feel excitement for their teaching. So I just can't emphasize enough how much I feel that last bullet is as important as all of the impacts for students. So what makes something a high impact practice? It's not just being on that list, because like I said, there could be practices that aren't on that list, particularly as we're talking about context outside the US. But basically what the research has shown is that it's practices that connect the classroom learning to post-classroom and that meet a set of criteria. And the criteria are as follows: that expectations are set at high levels, students are investing significant time and effort, and that is over a period of time. It's also experience with diversity, with both different people and different ways of thinking, and that can also be different ways of doing. It's receiving feedback, but that feedback is frequent, it's timely, and it's constructive. So those 3 areas of feedback are really important. It is, this last bullet, this next bullet, it's the ability to integrate what they're learning in the classroom into what they'll be doing next. So integrative learning, real world application, and then some sort of public demonstration. So being able to explain to others what they're doing. So now I know that's sort of a brief overview of what makes something a high impact practice, and I can actually put that list back. But I'm curious, what are some practices that you're doing that are currently, and we can also look at this one again, that are currently a high impact practice? And you could either think of this as something you're currently doing or something that you're interested in doing. And it's been shared with me that some of the things that you do are first-year seminar, undergraduate research, but I'm sure that there are many others that you're doing, or maybe some that you've been to a conference even today, or you've been reading in the literature and you've thought to yourself, I really would love to invest in learning more about X. So if some people could just drop in the chat, and maybe you could put C colon if you're currently doing it, and I colon if you're interested in doing it, and we could just see what are some things behind.
Kaçtı hocam?
Claire, I'm checking the chat. Indeed, I answered your question, and if you want, I can try to respond, at least on behalf of my department. I'm from Chemical Engineering Department.
Yeah, that'd be great. If you could share the responses.
Yes. I believe that many other departments are also applying it. At least we just didn't, we didn't know that they were called as high impact practices. But in our university, undergraduate research is commonly applied strategy among many different departments. So we actually encourage our students to involve in our research starting from their first year. We actually give capstone projects as the graduation projects at the fourth year, and we encourage our students to involve in the internship programs. And this program is counted as one of the technical electives in my department, for example. We actually encourage our students for the collaboration, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic, as we actually move to the online education, we used collaborative assignments more and more. So as far as I know, many departments are giving first year seminars. We wanted to give an idea about their professions by actually inviting different people from industry or from our graduates, so that they can actually mention about what they will actually see once they graduate, let's say, from chemical engineering department. And I can say that we are proud to say that most of the courses are involving intensive writing activities. We give a lot of projects to our students, and we expect them to return, the projects in a written, as a written report, and we ask them to present their results orally. And yes, we are involved in the Erasmus program, and every year, every semester, we send certain number of students abroad so that, they can take courses, they can actually learn a different culture. I don't know if I missed anything. At least these are my observations from my department. But anybody else can contribute to my answer, actually. What other high impact practices are we applying at our university? We are talking about service learning, actually. That is going to be a new activity for us. And we will give an additional credit to our students once they actually complete this, service learning activities. And what else? I don't know if we are applying any portfolio activities. I was going to ask you at the end of your talk, actually, what kind of activities can you suggest us so that our students can be aware of, preparing e-portfolio while they are students, at the university?
Yeah, that's a great question, e-portfolio. And actually, I have 3 examples at the end, all of which involve e-portfolio. Okay. So I think you're definitely thinking in the right direction, which is that we have all of these really wonderful individual experiences, but the next step is how do we bring them together? And also I would encourage you in your time together today and in your subsequent visits is to think about how do you take that great individual experience a student has? So they've gone on the Erasmus experience or they're doing undergraduate research. Can they identify the skills they learned in that experience for themselves and then for others? And often I find that the answer is no. And what team need help with helping students identify that they may not have thought about the skills that the students are learning because that's just not their mind frame. They're thinking about it in terms of learning outcomes because learned X, but not in what is a pretty easy flip. Okay, well, you wrote this lab report, you can explain to an employer that you now have research skills, you now have close reading, you have writing, attention to detail, problem solving, helping them make that short shift between subject matter, which is you are pipetting something, or maybe you're doing material science chemistry, but that student isn't going to pursue material science chemistry. But okay, they were in a lab for 6 months. You have to overcome difficulty. You work with others, you do all of these things. And so thinking about how do we have these conversations? Is that built into the undergraduate research experience? When you sit down in the beginning, have you talked about that? And this isn't a heavy lift. A great thing about this is we're not talking about, needing to revise the entire curriculum. We might be talking about 3 or 4 20-minute conversations to make a shift between, I don't know chemistry very well, but here's the content you learned. But let's shift that to talking about this more as I'm a chemistry major, but I've really decided I'm going to go into business. Great. Here's how we can talk about this. Remember that time that experiment didn't go well? Think about all of the perseverance you learned, the teamwork you learned, maybe we were short chemicals because of COVID and we had to pivot and do all of those things. We rarely, if ever, honestly, if ever, have those kind of conversations with students. And that's the missing link with high impact practices. And that's the missing link with this connecting curriculum to career. And that's where faculty need professional development, because when we think of our own training, we were not trained this way. No one really ever talked to us about anything outside of becoming a professor. At least that was my experience and the experience of almost everyone I know. And if anyone had a different experience, I would absolutely love for them to share. But even in pretty quote practical programs, you went to graduate school, you were going to become a professor, you were going to do research, and you were going to train other professors. And it's very rare that that's who our students are. And as I was showing you those demographics in the US, it's becoming more and more rare. Even at our top institutions, students are, they're very rarely going on to graduate school. So that would be my piece to you. And I think I will get to that a little bit later, but I thank you for sort of helping me insert that a bit earlier. Okay, so unfortunately I have to go back to my slides. So this is what I was just sharing with you, that there's this need to bridge the gap between subject matter learning and the learning designated as career relevant, and that we very rarely do this. Here in the US, and I know in most cases this is the case in most European institutions, we have our courses, and at least in the US we have career centers, and we send students over to the career center, and the career center is supposed to help them with the resume or with a job search. But it's thinking about, those things. What did you learn here? How can you talk about it? And that's why one of the key designators of high impact practices is public demonstration. It's being able to talk about your work publicly, but not only to talk about it in a subject matter way. Like I said, those chemicals got delayed due to COVID. Can you talk about that in a way of being flexible? One thing I would encourage you is most countries we have something called NACE, National Association of Colleges and Employers, and every year they publish a list of skills. That was where that list came from. I'm sure you have something similar from the government. Looking at those skills, what are the skills that you have learned? And the skills are almost always the same. They're communication, quantitative reasoning, writing, teamwork, working with diverse individuals. These are almost always the same skills, and they're not that different from country to country. So I also think when we're looking at classroom planning, getting these career skills from whatever recognized body you have as part of our planning helps us with this translation. And so here's some of the reasons this is really important, is that there's huge gaps between what students plan to do and what they actually do. So most students enter college and they say that they're going to do an internship. They're going to do all of this stuff. Again, this is based on going to the US Career Center. But then by the time they're a senior, they have not done the majority of these activities. So again, the more we can bake these things into the work we're already doing in the classroom, because the classroom is where we know we have the student. The classroom is not optional. You know, we have a saying here where we say college is the classroom. And for many of our students, particularly our minority students, that's what they're going to do. They're going to come to college, they're going to go to class, they don't have time to do these other things. So we really need to be able to give them the experience in the classroom. And then this gap is even higher for our minority students. So again, in the US, often these other things are something that happens outside the classroom. We have this very two-part sort of system, but that doesn't work for our minority students because they have jobs, they have families, and they're not going to do things that aren't part of their coursework. So part of our shift is really thinking about how do we make this part of our coursework. So now I want to just talk to you about how 3 colleges and states are doing this work. So this is a departmental plan, and I think this probably relates most to you all's work, but the others are interesting as well. And so this is kind of what we were talking about earlier. This is really thinking about how do all of your courses work together? How do your student learning outcomes also work with career competency outcomes and with experiential learning? So this is what this looks like when a department has already done the work. When they've mapped out all of this, they first identified their departmental level student learning outcomes. Then they've also connected them to the career competencies. So this is what I mentioned. This is from NACE, the external body that identifies career competencies, but this could be a governmental body, whatever might publish these kinds of lists. So then once they identified what they wanted students to learn, they looked to see when and where they were learning these competencies. And this process identified the holes, and it forced the department to be intentional about where experiential activities are both introduced and reinforced. Another thing I would really encourage you to think about is that happening? Is an activity being introduced and reinforced? So if a student is doing undergraduate research, is that scaffolded? Are they getting it introduced? Are they getting it intermediate? And then are they getting it reinforced? And I can tell you, I was doing this process yesterday with the campus, and they had great student learning outcomes, but they had no introduction. All they had was reinforced. So they had, if we looked at this, they would have had like column 1, 2, 3, 4. Column 4 was great. They had spent a ton of time to come up with really great student learning outcomes. They had actually tied these in to their university's goals. Great. They had identified really robust experiential learning activities. Again, really great work, but it was all at the advanced level. They hadn't thought backwards to say, where do we need to be introducing these high impact practices? Because we can't expect students to have these skills unless we have introduced them. So I often find that is a missing piece. And again, this department had done really great work. They were further along than most, but I think that's often a missing piece and something I would encourage you to think about. And then the piece that's almost always missing from something like this is, are your career competencies a part of this? So you've thought about your courses, you've thought about what you want students to learn. You know what a graduate of your university, you know what an ideal graduate should know and be able to do and articulate. But have you added those career competencies in? And what this does is helps with that course planning. When I sit down to write my syllabus, it's up in front of me. Now I'm thinking in that first year seminar, all right, I'm focused on writing and collaborative learning, but I'm also going to be articulating for myself and my students that teamwork and collaboration, oral and written communication is what you're learning and what you should be able to communicate to yourself and to others at the end of this course. So this kind of mapping exercise is really, really valuable. And then it uncovers the work that then needs to be done, obviously, because then this will lead to, you know, what professional development do you need? What new courses do you need? Even what hiring decisions maybe do you need? And so this is, you know, what I would look at as transformation through experiential learning. So what we had before was disconnected but great experiences. Professors teaching interesting courses with interesting experiential learning opportunities, but they were disconnected. And they were largely focused around the professor's own interests. So this professor is really interested in undergraduate research and this particular topic, and they've designed this really great course. And this professor is interested in this, and they've designed this really great course. And there's really great things going on, and students are learning really great things. But there hasn't been an intentional design to see how does this all fit together to create a plan for the student. The student hasn't been centered in that plan. So what I would encourage everyone to do is to recenter that, to think less about individualized experiences and prioritizing the professor's research interests, and to bring to the focus, what do we want our students to be able to say and do when they leave? And have we sufficiently prepared for that? Have we planned for that? And can they do that? Do we know that they can do that? So just a different way of thinking about that, refocusing the student learning is the outcome, is the focus. So the next example I want to share with you is a university-wide initiative. So this comes from a large urban public university in Atlanta, Georgia, which is a southern city in the United States. They decided that they wanted to focus on the connection between college and careers, you can see in that circle, as an initiative about 3 years ago. They actually were doing this as part of their accreditation, which is something you have to do in the US, and as a statewide plan. So all undergraduates have a career pathway, and they're part of a learning community. So they're joined together in these groups the first semester. They also added technology so that students can get real-time job data for the Atlanta area. And this is before they even arrive on campus. I can tell you that this campus is hugely data-driven. The leader of this campus is just a huge data person. So they're swimming in data. So they are giving students access to that data before they even get to campus. They also created faculty and departmental grants to encourage instructors to integrate assignments that highlight career competencies. And this is at both the lower level and at the capstone level. And then finally, they're using e-portfolios to articulate the connection between learning for employers. So students are given an e-portfolio in their first year, and then they have that throughout their lifespan, so post-graduation even. One thing to note about e-portfolios, someone needs to, the e-portfolios can kind of belong to no one and everyone by default, if that makes sense. E-portfolios don't work when they're just in a capstone, in my experience, but then they can also be challenging when it's the expectation is, well, you'll be adding to your e-portfolio throughout your career. So I think the challenge of e-portfolios is really thinking about who do they belong to? Who sort of is the guiding light of the e-portfolio? And I don't think there's one right way to do it, but that would be my suggestion to you, is that when you just sort of a tool given to students, and with the best of intentions, they're supposed to be adding it to it again along the 4 years, that rarely works. And again, when it's built into this capstone, that rarely works. But because of the nature of the setup of universities, there's rarely sort of this connector piece throughout a student's journey. So if you're able to figure that part out, could it be an advisor? Is there someone at your university who follows that student? That I think is the tricky part of ePortfolio. But there is some wonderful research out of New York on ePortfolios, and they more than anyone else have kind of cracked this. So I'm happy to forward you that after this presentation. education, if that would be helpful. Here's kind of an example of what I was talking about before about just articulating to students, what is it they're learning? You've done all of these great things, but have we sat down and kind of said, you know, here's what you've learned. Like, look at all of this stuff we've done. And so this is just kind of a simple way of showing that. But again, that simple thing is really powerful. And the great part about this is it doesn't have to be this huge thing. These can be short conversations that are built into the existing, you know, the existing experiential education you're already doing, or when you're building new experiential learning opportunities built in. But this was something that University of Georgia or Georgia State had that I thought was nice and sort of very well visualized this idea. Then the third option that I wanted to show you is experiential learning pathways. This is, excuse me, similar to the previous example, but doesn't only focus on college to career. Rather, it's an intentional way of bringing together multiple high impact practices across the student's academic journey. This is also from the same state as the previous example. However, this is from a very small rural institution. So I wanted to show the dichotomy between a very large urban institution and a pretty small rural institution. The way they have set up their program is a combination of required and optional practices. So in this example, you have to do the first three. So every student is in a first year experience, every student does career planning milestones, and every student does a capstone in the last year. But then they have free choice. They can choose two from leadership, research, community learning, study abroad, and internships. And so they've been very intentional in making sure that students will have high impact practices across their 4 years. And basically, that is one of the really key tenets that we've learned over the last years is that this can't be optional, that students don't do optional. And so for high impact practices to have impact and for them to reach the students we most need them to reach, those students who are most at risk of not graduating, the students, typically students who are minorities or students who are in that non-traditional group, they need to not be optional because, you know, our most vulnerable students just don't do optional for a whole host of reasons. So what the trend we've seen in particularly the last 5 years, but 5 to 10 years, is high impact practices moving from an optional kind of a nice to have to an intentional part of the curriculum, to looking more like this, part of the curriculum. I think if you would have thought of a curriculum map a couple years ago, the high impact practices wouldn't have been a part of that. And I don't know what your curriculum maps look like, but they may or may not include high impact practices so upfront as that. But personally, I think it's great to see that we're moving to that direction of making this an opportunity that is available to everyone. And then we're also following that up with data practices to ensure that access and that participation and the opportunity is in fact equitable. I'm not going into data at this point because that's a whole other presentation, but happy to talk about that with anyone who might be interested. So just a few questions to think about. Is experiential learning happening at the right point in your curriculum? Is it intentionally designed? Does everyone have access? Are the skills you're teaching relevant in 2022? Do you articulate the why to students and to faculty? And I, again, don't want to forget that we need to articulate why this is important to faculty. And do you have the data you need to know who is participating? And then I will just leave this here. I'm not going to read this to you, but these are just some lessons I've learned about from campuses who are successful. Pretty much every campus I've seen who is successful does at least the vast majority of these 10 points, if not all 10 of these points. I want us to leave time for questions, so I'm going to close off my slides so I can see all of you.
Thank you very much, Claire, for your very nice presentation.